which is a nice segue for me into Nick Saban. Because you've heard me say Nick Saban is king of all recruiters. Because Nick Saban, at 69, still wants to go do this, okay? He still wants to get it in. And there are a couple of stories that I have told Ron that I'm going to tell you all, and I'm going to tell him again to try to get across this point, because I'm amazed at just some of the stuff that Nick Saban is willing to do to go get players, and none of them have to do with paying anybody. There's any those kinds of stories. It is about outworking people, though, because when Nick Saban was at Miami, he gave a really interesting quote that I wanted to give to you about how he saw himself. So he's at Miami, and Mal Moore had gone down to try to recruit him to go to Tuscaloosa. He wasn't in on it, ended up coming around to it. But when he was asked about why college was more enticing to him, this is a quote from Monty Burke's book about Nick Saban called The Making of a Coach. The NFL had become more of a socialist enterprise than the meritocracy that Saban preferred. Quote, in the NFL, you were penalized for success, end quote. A good season meant a more difficult schedule in the following one. It also meant a lower position in the subsequent NFL draft. This left Saban feeling constricted. Quote, in the NFL, you only get one first-round draft pick, and that's if it hadn't already been traded away, he says. You couldn't really outwork anybody. In college, I could recruit 10 players with first-round talent every year. And what does the man do every single year? Recruit 10 dudes that gon' get drafted in the first round. And I want to follow that story up with this one. So when he's on the plane with Mal Moore, going back to Tuscaloosa, being introduced and signing the paperwork to be Alabama's head coach, Saban's on the plane looking at Mal, and he says, Mal, let me ask you something. At this point, the story's being told from Mal's point of view. The engine's roaring, and he's staring at him like Saban stares at everybody. Saban's leg has started to bounce. At that point, adrenaline was staving off exhaustion. Any pretense he might have felt had been completely stripped away. Saban asked, do you think you've hired the best coach in the country? Moore was taken aback by the question, not exactly sure where it was heading. He didn't know Saban that well, still found him hard to read. Moore rubbed his big hands together and cleared his throat. He says, why, Nick, of course I do, he said while thinking to himself, for $4 million, I sure as hell hope so. It's paying $4 million a year. To which Saban says, well, you didn't. I'm nothing without my players. But you did just hire a hell of a recruiter. Nick Saban. Okay? And one more to go on this thing to drive this whole thing home. All right. He is defense coordinator not defense coordinator. He is secondary coach at Michigan State. Hadn't yet been promoted. So sometimes he even had to reach back to an earlier generation. Andre Rison, the wide receiver who would play 12 years in the NFL and make the Pro Bowl in 5 of those seasons, was a star recruit from Flint, Michigan in 1984. Early during his recruitment, he was leaning towards signing with Wisconsin or Michigan. Saban was assigned to Rison, and he wanted him badly. In his research, Saban discovered that his grandmother was a woman named Alberta Brown from Fairmont, West Virginia, Rison's grandmother. The same Alberta Brown, whom Saban had known all his life. She drove a garbage truck in town. He lived at nearby Monaga, which is right there next to Fairmont. During the Christmas break that year, Saban and Terry, that's Nick Saban's wife, went home to West Virginia. They were expected to attend a Christmas Eve party at Terry's mother's house. Instead, Saban paid Brown a visit that night, and he stayed at her house drinking beer and talking to her about her grandson until 3 a.m. Though Terry and her mother were not pleased at all that he missed the family get-together, Saban's visit worked. Rison enrolled at Michigan State. Ron, come on, man. Who wants it more than Saban? And he still wants it 30 plus years later. Like, not to date this too much, but I'm born in 87. You know, you 86, baby. This dude is doing this 10 years into his career, and he's still doing it now in 2020. Did you hear me tell them the story about Kamar Wheaton and how, dude was basically a OU lean and Saban got him on the phone. He's committed to Alabama now. That's the second year in a row that's happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Like for the most part, all the stories that you've told me is that like the way like Nick Saban absolutely works. Like think of the TV show industry, right? Like you get on the phone, you talk to people, you work contacts, you make sales, right? But on top of that, I've never thought of Nick Saban as, the cool white dude.
Right.
But you read these stories, or you told me the stories, and I've done a handful of digging myself, and it's like people absolutely say, like, yeah, he came in, dude got like a wild silver tongue. And like, I know that Nick Saban has like this, mint julep turned into a human person, like persona about him. But, we've seen enough Nick Saban to know that he makes grown dudes cry. Like, dude's hard as a rock. And it's just, I just have a hard time putting those two things together, that he's real smooth, like on top of being real dedicated.
Apparently, it is only on a football field or in a football setting in which Nick Saban, the tyrannical lunatic, comes out. Because everything I'm reading so far is the dude off the field is likable, not mild-mannered, right? But likable, right? And he'll talk with you. In a football setting, in football offices, he is a holy terror. This is the kind of dude who would, cuss out professional football players. Matter of fact, Jerry Glanville, who is a character unto himself, was head coach for the Houston Oilers and gave Nick Saban his first job in the pros, right? Saban went up there to interview, and my man, sorry. He goes up there to interview, and he's doing the whiteboard. He's doing, which is what Saban does with all his assistants. And you'll sit there talking X's and O's all day. First time he goes up there with a jacket and tie on, Glanville says, you better take that jacket and tie off if you want this job, which is a clue. Saban goes to the whiteboard, starts to draw X's and O's, and he gets hit with a balled up piece of paper, and he looks at Glanville like, what? My guys are going to do that to you in a meeting. How are you going to keep them on track? This is what you're going to have to deal with in the pros. And there was another dude named Chris Dishman, who was one of the defensive backs that Saban coached for the Oilers then. And he tells a story of, I didn't know that my name was Chris Dishman when I played for Coach Saban, because he used to call me F and A-hole, all the syllables, all the words. So much so that I checked my jersey a couple times to make sure it had Dishman on the back, because I thought my name was F and A-hole. And I can't imagine what kind of moxie it takes for you to do that to professional athletes, for dudes that are grown. You can't yell at them like this. Like, I'm surprised nobody wanted to sock him. And apparently they did. Like, Louis Riddick is in this book saying, I didn't know if the dude liked me. And this is when he played for him at the Browns, and the Browns were a great defense for that 1 year. He was there in 94. It's like, if you could get past the yelling and you could hear him, he was an outstanding coach. Like, he knows the game, and he will make you better. There are guys that did not belong in the NFL that he gave 5-10 year careers just by coaching them up. But the only way he knows how to coach you up is by yelling at you and cussing you out constantly. And you and I have already had this discussion, I think, off tape, maybe not on tape, but we'd have a hard time playing for a dude like Nick Saban, because we grown. You're not going to be able to just yell at me and cuss me out. I'm not going to do it. And yet, apparently, there is a special kind of football player that really wants that, and only that, from Nick Saban.
I mean, hey, if that's your football kink, like, I'm not here to shame you.
Oh, man.
If you need to be yelled at, fine, but I'm not going to be there.
Right?
And here's the thing: if I'm your homeboy and I see you getting yelled at by this person, you might have to hold me back.
Right.
Even if that's what you want, it's like, you got to protect. You now have to protect me from him.
To that end, though, like, apparently when he was the defense coordinator at Michigan State, they had a problem with fighting on George Perlis' team. So much so that George Perlis took a table, put it on the 50-yard line at practice, and put a couple of Everglass boxing gloves on it. And if you wanted to fight at practice, you had to do it in front of the whole crew. You had to get this like and subscribe in front of everybody. And that is why, and that is how they curtailed fighting. Because it turned out, didn't nobody want to you're right. Didn't nobody want to ring that bell or get their bell rung in front of the team. Because you get knocked out in front of 100 dudes. Everybody in the world knows you got knocked out forever and ever. Amen. So they stopped fighting each other because they didn't want to take the chance that they get caught with like or subscribe. That's 1987. What are we doing? That's how we handle fighting. Apparently, if you're George Perlis, this is how you handle fighting.
I mean, this is before the concussion protocol, so you can just do whatever. Dudes got put to sleep on that one.
Oh man,
picked up and got taken to the dorm room. They just slept it off. Glad they didn't die.
Right. Glad they didn't die. Because, I imagine that there's a defensive back that picked a fight with an offensive lineman. I just imagine it. Because, if you play safety and you coming off the edge and you talking noise about getting, bending the corner on this dude, and that dude decides he's tired of you talking and y'all got to go fight, I don't think that's going to work out for the defensive back. I think there's a bit of a height and weight disadvantage there, if you know what I mean. And I also thought it was interesting that, Nick Saban is basically me, right? We're about the same size. And there are grown men. What?
Oh, I mean, when you said...
Oh, you thought I was going something else?
I was about to say, wow,
no.
This dude has got clout poisoning.
No. I'm saying that to say most of the dudes he's yelling at are a good 14 to 16 inches taller than him and about 100 pounds heavier than him on average, right? And yet every last one of these men is terrified of him, right? Like, they don't want the smoke, but they also want to please him, which is a very peculiar thing when it comes to football coaches, because you really want that to happen.